Hello and welcome back to the West Ham Breakdown with me, Jack Elderton, and my mate Callum Goodall, in a week where we were defeated 3-0 by Spurs in the derby. Really disappointing result, and we'll come to talk about that and other things today. We're going to talk about the tactics in this match, the 4-2-3-1, and the sticking with what we did against Nottingham Forest, but getting the inverse result and how that happens. We'll talk about proposed development from 2 years ago and what has happened since then. How much is the team developing and how much is it getting better? What happens and what changes as new players come into the team, and how much of an impact they have on us, and what we can sort of foresee going forward with that. We'll talk about individual performances, and we'll talk about trend data from Moyes to Lopetegui and Potter. And if you want those last two things, you're going to have to join us on extra time, because we can't fit all of this into one podcast. Obviously, we do two every single week. We're a little bit late this week because I've been ill, Charlie's been ill, Darcy's been ill, Cal's the only one who's healthy. And you've been away all weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
Supposedly meant to be on the piss up in Scotland, but apparently the price of booze before we
Wasn't what I thought. It's not what I've heard about the North.
Was a little too high. So you're fresh and ready to go. I'm expecting a good display from you today. But yeah, if you want to grab the second half of that, patreon.com/Analytics United. You can get the first week free. Try it before you buy it. We do a lot of good stuff over there that I'm really proud of. A lot of hard work goes into every week. A lot of preparation on the opposition, trying to build understanding of how every single team in the Premier League plays, but also teams around Europe as well. To keep our finger on the pulse in terms of what players we should be looking at, what players we should be interested in, but also, what styles are functioning well, what styles aren't functioning well, what managers are doing well, what managers aren't doing well. But Cal, we're here to talk about Spurs. Unfortunately, I wish we were here to talk about some of those other things. How are you feeling after that hell of a display?
I had the one benefit was that I was at the wedding and we were playing while the dinner service was on, so I didn't actually watch it live, which felt beneficial as I was seeing the sort of updates come through from obviously our group chat, but also just Twitter and stuff like that. And then the flip side was that I obviously did have to watch it before the podcast, and the best time I could do that was on a 6-hour train back from Edinburgh, which actually I think maybe made it worse because I knew what I was about to get into. So it was pretty painful. And just, I hate this. This is one of the biggest things that concerns me in football, particularly having covered West Ham for so long, is when you start to feel a sense of familiarity about negative things. Like, when does something become a one-off and move in towards a trend? And there are obviously some things that stand out in this performance that it's becoming increasingly difficult to just look over and say, oh, with time. And now I'm starting to get more into the concerned territory, which obviously we'll come to discuss later on in the pod. But yeah, just disappointing. I think we started okay. We limited the opposition, but we've done that in most of the games so far this season, and only one of them we've won. So, add in the fact that it's a rivalry and a derby match, and it was at home, and all those other factors, and it starts to feel even more bitter.
Yeah, I think this was a game where you could really sense that the feeling dramatically shifted. It's not necessarily that the performance was drastically worse than other performances we put in this season or even last season. Yep. It's not that even the result was drastically worse or than other results we've had this season. It is worse than results we had last season, certainly under Potter. But the feeling has shifted. I think it was pretty clear at the end of the game when you saw the way that the stadium was emptying out, that the mood around the place is not good, and the general optimism in terms of anything actually shifting or anything improving has decreased to a really worrying point, to the point that it becomes more difficult as the team or as the coach to turn it around, because you've lost the patience of sort of almost the average fan, if you know what I mean. Like, you can, as a manager or as a team, when things go badly, you lose a couple of games, one game, you lose the patience of some fans. That is just the way it is, and everyone knows that. But there is always a point at which people stick with you and stick with you and stick with you. And you've kind of got the majority or the average match going fan is still stuck with you up until a certain point. And then you go and lose 3-0 in the derby against Spurs. You have a man sent off.
Having lost 5-1 in the previous home game in the derby against Chelsea, I think.
Yeah, exactly. You have a man sent off and you have the last sort of 30 minutes of the game where you can't even really get out to the ball. You can't really win the ball back. They're just passing it around. And then that's when it shifts. And as much as I feel kind of sympathetic to the fact that when you're down to 10 men, you're in a very difficult position, right? Because you've got one way of approaching that, which is we're going to continue to try and compete. We're going to continue to try and disrupt. We're going to continue to try and press in some way and play. And with one player less, the risk that we invoke in doing that might mean that we concede more goals. We know the opposition has high quality attackers. We don't want to open too much space for them. We don't want to turn this from 3-0 to 4-0 to 5-0 to 6-0 or worse. And then as a result, of that line of thought, you go to what I think is the correct thing to do, which is it's 3-0. I think what we need to do here is we need to lock this down and make sure it's not worse than 3-0. Mm-hmm. But then you have a period in a home game, in a derby against Spurs, where you're not competing. And I think that is the kind of moment in which when patience is already thin, that's when you break that last line of patience from your sort of average match going fan. And it gets tough. I mean, it's not that it's not been tough before, but now it gets really tough because the evidence to spin it around needs to be stronger. It's not, you're not going to just need one result. You're going to need results and performances week on week to try and bring people back around, which puts everyone, I think, in a difficult position. Last week we talked about box defending being better, team level organization being better, the team being more compact, a better goalkeeper performance. All of those things came together for us against Nottingham Forest. How did those elements go in this game against Spurs?
Yeah, not very well. not very well. Do you know what? The box defending I actually thought was okay. The issue was that, and I think this is one of the things I was alluding to really when I said that it was becoming somewhat of a trend, and probably the most alarming trend of them all, is that it's all well and good to revert back to something slightly more familiar for many players in the squad, this 4-2-3-1 mid-block. And in large parts, I think it makes sense for where we are, and I think also a lot of it worked. As we said, we limit Spurs in terms of open play chance creation, which is what you want from your mid-block. That's fine. We've ushered them outside. We've got some good back post defending from Diouf. We've got some decent sort of 1v1 defending from Walker-Peters, which if you're going to set up in a mid-block and funnel the opposition outside, that's what you're looking for. You want the dribblers to not be able to get past, and you want the aerials to be contested. And I think also the centre-backs box defending was decent as well. The issue was that in doing that, you invite a lot of pressure, and then you concede a lot of set pieces, and therein lies the biggest issue, right? Again, it's set pieces. All three goals really are attributed to set pieces in some ways. Obviously, the first one is directly from a corner, and the other ones are, in various instances, second phase. And it's just not really good enough, is it? Like, you can't really set up in a way that is sort of hard baked in to concede set pieces if you then can't defend the subsequent set pieces, which was the big difference as to why it worked so well under Moyes, is that we still conceded a lot of set pieces, but we were one of the most effective set piece teams at both ends of the pitch. So you kind of safeguarded against it, whereas now we look completely vulnerable in defending our own set pieces and pretty useless in attacking set pieces as well. Like, there's probably 3 games I can think of so far already this season where we've had chances that Ward-Prowse or Bowen have whipped in that have just either failed to meet their man, or the headers have just not been strong enough to actually hit the target or trouble the keeper, which if you can't... I mean,
Kilman should score in this game. That's a really good example.
And I think Agurd should have scored earlier in the season as well, and stuff like that. It's like fundamentals, and if you can't get the fundamentals right, all the other intricate stuff that comes around it is kind of pointless, because as soon as you go behind, the game state that you want to operate in is gone, and you can't play with the confidence that you probably need, and certainly we don't have anyway at the minute based on results.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to win playing that way if you can't dominate those sort of margins, and What I will say though, and I think it's really important that we acknowledge this, is that we don't as a team exist in a vacuum, and I think that has got harder generally anyway. So I think when you look at Thomas Frank being Spurs manager, when you look at what Mikel Arteta has done with Arsenal as well, you've got teams. I mean, Liverpool are really good at this as well. Chelsea have been very good at this season. You've got teams that are, set pieces are no longer. There maybe was a period where set pieces were looked at as kind of like an additional that wasn't necessarily very important to a team that was trying to dominate and trying to win games by having more possession, by forcing the opposition back, and trying to create chances. And there's a period where basically, there's probably very heavily influenced by Pep, but a lot of the set pieces went short, and it was more about getting the ball back in play and trying to maintain pressure that way. Now we look at the top of the table, and we've got teams that are not only really fucking good at set pieces, but we've got teams that are actually like operating from the basis of trying to win as many set pieces as possible, because that is actually the primary way in which they're going to generate a winning game state from which they can begin to operate differently and start to create different kinds of chances and start to score more goals, because other teams have to open out a little bit more, have to commit a little bit more forwards. And that works in coordination with the fact that like Arsenal and Spurs have been criticised a lot for Spurs so far this season, definitely been criticised a lot for how they've operated in build-up. So you have maybe a little bit less fluidity through build-up, or a lot more numbers back to help you in build-up, and then therefore you're attacking low blocks a lot more of the time, so you have to be better at set pieces. But also works with so many teams at the bottom of the league, in the bottom half, taking approaches that are more focused on being really secure defensively, being really tough to beat, making sure that you can eke out results like that. You look at kind of like the difference between last season and the teams that come up, and then Leeds this season, who just go out into the transfer market and buy loads of really big guys and are playing that way, focusing on being really solid defensively. They've got a midfield that's going to be really tough to get through.
I think Burnley,
so when you bring those
weekend,
things together, you get these big
against Liverpool, managed to almost keep out the champions.
When you bring those things together, you get big teams that are focusing more on set pieces and are getting better at set pieces. And it's not just corners. Like you've got Spurs are taking, Bergfast's doing long throws into the box. I'm sure we'll see that happen. Arsenal are doing long throws into the box. We're going to see more and more of this sort of thing as a way to generate upside, which means that as a team that's trying to like break through and has less resources and maybe worse players, playing a 4-2-3-1 and targeting set pieces and saying, look, we'll be really solid defensively and we'll just be better than the big teams at set pieces because we know we can do that, is a lot harder than it was previously. It's a lot harder to do that. But it doesn't mean that it's acceptable to be quite as bad as we are. It actually makes it so much worse to be quite as bad as we are, because you can't get away with it maybe as often as you might have been able to previously. Beforehand it might have been, we really can't be that bad at set pieces against a Brentford, or against now Everton under Moyes or whatever. Now it's like you can't be bad at set pieces against anyone, because everyone's got a set piece coach. Everyone's focusing really intently on trying to create from set pieces, and you just get punished week in, week out if you don't do it well. Let's talk specifically about the goals. I know people probably watched that first goal and just couldn't handle the free header at the back post. But can you? I mean, we're neither of us a set piece analyst, right? I would think it's clear that we say that. There were some people in the space like Jake Fox, I think, absolutely amazing at set piece analysis, and it's one of those things that I think you have to really kind of like go hard into and nerd out on to get really, really good at. And I haven't personally done that. But can you sort of give a basic description of what Spurs do and what they execute well to be able to enable that at the back post for Sarr?
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing especially revolutionary, is it? It's blockers, which is something that we should be well aware of. But ultimately, we've adopted a zonal approach to defending our box on set pieces, which you can love or loathe, depending on where you fall on that side of the debate anyway. I understand the zonal thing, but again, it kind of comes back down to it works well if you know how to do it. And at the minute, it feels like we're just not really good at doing it. I feel like some of the matchups in terms of, obviously you have some zone or some man, and then you get the blockers. I think it's in this instance, is it Bergval is blocking, and then there's, who's the second blocker?
It's Bergval and Palinha blocking on Diouf and Souček.
Yeah,
and that's
which
and that's a reaction to in the first half where Spurs have lots and lots of corners. They start to target the back post, but actually, like, you have, I think it's on 2 occasions, Souček does like amazingly well to jump whilst moving backwards and get just like the very top of the back of his head onto it to flick it away because they're overloading the back stick.
Yeah, I think that's it. And then, as you say, that response from them, and Diouf as well, who we've already mentioned, aerially, particularly defensively, is more than capable of holding his own. So as soon as Spurs target that, take both of those out, it makes it very difficult for our defenders to then pick up the loose man because of the confusion of, oh wait, I thought you were going to be able to get there and then you've been blocked and you weren't able to get there, but I've kind of left that with you, so whose fault is it anyway, sort of thing. And then I think also, I don't know, I feel like I've spoke about the goalkeeper so much, but sometimes I look at these things and just think, well, if the goalie was slightly more assertive, how much of this is covered anyway? I don't know if I'm being overly harsh on him in this instance, because I think, as you say, Spurs do a very good job of blocking our defenders, and then you do kind of just get the free man at the back post. But as I say, to tie it all back together, it does ultimately come back round to the whole zonal approach anyway. And I think then people will just question, well, what's the point in the approach if you are able to... how well Spurs have done or not, if there is a situation in which there is a man that is able to just be completely free at the back post, is that an approach that really holds much merit anyway, given how vulnerable we've been?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I don't know enough about how to react in these moments, frankly, because I don't know enough about set pieces to be able to describe this, accurately enough. Yeah. But just as, I suppose I would say, as a fan, I would say that I kind of, when we get 2 sort of NFL style blockers like that on our back post zonal defenders, can we find a way to buy a free kick out of that rather than allowing it to happen? Mm-hmm. Because ultimately that is, that's what's going on. I know everyone is doing it, but our 2 back post defenders are being fouled. They're being pushed out of the zone so that they can clear it by 2 Spurs players. And it feels to me in those situations you want to find a way to make sure that you can go down and get a foul out of it, to make it clear to the referee that's what's going on, and the refs are never going to give you it if you don't find a way to do that. No. If you do it and it doesn't go well, it sometimes looks worse, but I think it's still in those situations probably advisable to try and make it clear to the referee that that's what's going on.
Yeah, and I think the fact we were able to buy a foul in the first half, right, means that we didn't go into half-time 1-0 down. So, but then I don't know, you wander into the realms of conspiracy, don't you? Does the ref go in at half-time and go, oh, hang on a sec, that was actually a bit soft, and then doesn't look at the other ones? But yeah, like you say, this has been a long-term thing though, right? Like the squad lacking dark arts and not necessarily playing the game when all other 19 teams in the Premier League are willing to do that shit. There does come a time where you have to swallow your pride and just go, actually, all right, can't beat them, join them. And I think that is a big issue.
Matej Fernandes was definitely playing the game on Mickey van der Ven. He was very lucky not to give away a penalty on that instance. I'll rattle through goals 2 and 3 very quickly. Goal 2 is just, like red card, shock of red card, and then reaction to red card. I think is really what you can put that down to. Good point, well made. I think it's good to see the team talking in that instance and trying to react positively to going down to 10 men. Just let's not be talking when the ball is in play. Bowen has got his back turned to play, he's chatting to whoever, and then by the time he turns around, the ball is moved. We have to then drop off instead of being able to react to the ball being played and immediately press and try and force the ball backwards. And then you give Romero time. Romero is capable of doing something like that. It's a very high quality ball over the top. Maybe Mavro and Walker-Peters can hold the line a bit better, at least pick up Bergval a bit better. Bergval gets free, and then I think goalkeeper again. I have real questions. Sort of seems to make a very late decision to try and come forward, and then he cancels on that, and then he's off his line, and his momentum's kind of taking him in the wrong, and then it's hard to make the save once Bergvall gets his head to it. The third one, set piece second phase, has been so bad this season, and I think it's just like inexcusable for it to continue to be as bad as it is. Like, we reorganize so slowly, and even if we're not reorganizing slowly, we reorganize completely, like, confusedly. Like, there isn't any clear understanding of how to refind a shape and how to defend once the ball pops out from a set piece. So we've got players like all over the shop. Kyle Walker-Peters is doing like man-to-man marking on Cristiano Romero like it's still a set piece. So he's hugging him on the edge of the box. Bowen's defending at centre-back, and then he tries like running back towards the line instead of staying with Van de Ven. Mavropanos and Kilman have got swapped over, and Mavropanos just wants to play right centre. He doesn't care that he's at left centre-back. He wants to play right centre-back. So he sees Bergvall in space very late, goes, oh, maybe I should cover that, and then goes, no, I'm going back to right centre back. I don't care. Yep. I'm going back to my position, and then obviously very easy to pass to Bergvall, Van de Ven. You just can't concede goals like that. It's way too easy, and I think it's very easy for me to sit here and say more time spent on the training ground looking at set piece second phases stops that. And that might not be true, but I'm still going to sit here and say that because I've never seen us, well, I have, but in the last sort of 5 years, I haven't seen us be quite this vulnerable to what happens after a set piece. Can we find a shape and can we defend? I've not seen something like this. We've always been better at it than this, and it's not something that's, you know, we're being unlucky about, that's happening a couple of times, like a shot's being popped in from the edge of the box. This is just structurally, we're just a complete mess as soon as we defend a set piece, and it's just happening over and over again. So there's obviously something going wrong in terms of how we're preparing to deal with those situations. Let's take a break there. We'll talk a little bit about the tactics in this game, how the tactical matchup worked. I think we've kind of covered some of that, but we'll go into a little bit more depth, and then we'll come back at the end and talk about how development towards being a more possession focused team is going over time.
Stick around.
Before we get into tactics chat, we do have some exciting news to talk about. We're battering Sam Delaney. What is he on about? What is he talking about? Battering Sam Delaney? Cal, stay tuned.
Yes.
We've raised loads of dough.
We've done fantastically well. So to those of you that listened, or for those of you that listened to the last episode, you will have heard us talk about a fundraising initiative called Stay Tuned for a charity called Campaign Against Living Miserably, or CALM, UK-based suicide prevention charity that I just so happen to work for, but also that everybody should support because they are doing genuinely life-saving work. And yeah, we just have a massive, massive thank you to give, really. We've been blown away by the support, considering we've only mentioned it once so far this month, and it's running all throughout September. We set ourselves what feels like a fairly measly target of £500 now, considering we've already raised £569.50, given just one single shout out. And as you did reference, Jack, we are in fact beating Sam Delaney, friend of the pod and friend of mine, and Calm ambassador, who is actually fundraising across all three of his podcasts with the support of West Ham royalty in X and Dave as well. So I would say we are performing incredibly well, but in our ambitious streak, we have decided to increase our fundraising target to £1,000, and we really, really hope that you guys will support us. And this is not me asking people that have already donated to donate again, but I'm sure there's many of you who are listening to it and were curious about donating and maybe haven't got round to it yet. Maybe you didn't have the money at the time. Like I said, this goes right until the last day of September, so there is plenty of time to support. And yeah, obviously, we know that people are up against it at the minute. If you ain't got the dough, don't worry. But if you have, literally anything that you can chuck in would be well received. And we did say that for those of you that donated more than £50, we would give you a shout out. And I haven't forgotten. So big shout outs, I suppose. First off to my old man, who chucked in £66 in Bobby Moore's honour. And also my brother was named Bobby after Bobby Moore, and there is a whole connection there. So yeah, big up to the old boy there. We've had a couple of anonymous donations as well. So if you know who you are, obviously huge shout outs to you as well. £50 from Scott Borden, big love. Another £100 from Angus French, which, mate,
legend.
fair play. Fair play. I don't even know what to say. Yeah, Jack, you've put it better there. Legend. You genuinely are. And yeah, as I say, anyone that's donated is a lifesaver. And then I think the final shout out is to Old Greg's Creamy Baileys, which I believe is a Mighty Boosh reference. Something about drinking Baileys out of a shoe. I've not watched it in a very long time, but it is actually a favourite show of myself, my dad, and my brother. So it felt like a lovely way to wrap up the shout-outs there. But yeah, as I say, if you do want to get involved and chuck some more money in the direction of Calm, all the links will be in the show notes. Like I say, we are currently beating Sam Delaney. We would like to continue to be beating Sam Delaney and be the foremost West Ham fundraising outfit in the sector. Other people that are beating us, I think we're third overall. But that's nothing to be ashamed of, because Scroobius Pip is one of the two ahead of us, who is genuine podcast royalty. And then the other two that are beating us are the Shut Up I'm Talking podcast, which is Jack Manifold and Tommy Innit, who I think have a combined YouTube subscriber base of 16 million. And
how far ahead of us are they?
Very good question, actually. Let's have a look. They have so far raised... I think it's about £1,300. I've not got it up in front of me, but it's not miles ahead, considering that they've got 18 million combined followers, and we've not even got 5,000 on YouTube, I don't think. So we're doing a good effort in terms of pound per follow.
Yeah, so if you want to see, if you care about suicide prevention, number one, please do throw in some money to the fundraiser. If you want to see us beat Tommy Innit. And you want to see us ahead, I know I do, on a leaderboard above the West Ham way, then let's get going.
Let's do it. Let's cook.
Thank you so much to everyone who has donated so far. It's kind of blew me away.
Same.
How much we managed to raise and so quickly. I think it speaks really positively about the audience and actually how well you have explained what Stay Tuned is, which you should do because you set it up.
I hope so.
But explain the importance of the fundraiser and the importance of your work outside of AU that you do there. And if anyone cares about that, you were on Sam Delaney's pod talking about your work there and exactly why you work there and what you do there, which I'm sure we can put a link to in the description as well if people are interested in that. I want to go on to something positive, but I have to go to something not so positive. It's tactics chat from the Spurs game. Look, to be honest, I don't really have any issue with the way that we executed our 4-2-3-1 sort of mid block against Spurs. I think we tried, which I appreciated. We tried to do some of the things that Bournemouth did well against them when Bournemouth dominated. I think it's the previous match, right? The direct previous match, and won 1-0. They did a really, really good job of cutting the pitch, forcing Spurs to play down their left-hand side. Christian Romero, obviously the highest quality build-up player in the Spurs back line. If you can guide the ball away from him and more to Van de Ven, then you might find that you get more success. Bournemouth showed that was absolutely true. It made it very, very difficult for Spurs. I think one of the things they did so well, though, is that they did that with high intensity. They had jumps to follow, forced Spurs to play long into Richarlison. Their centre-backs were all over Richarlison. They turned the ball over time and time again because of that. I think the thing that's really difficult for us is because of the profiles that we have in midfield and the energy that we have in midfield. We're kind of forced to do it in a much more passive way, which, it was kind of like an homage, but kind of a bit of a shit one to what Bournemouth did, because in many ways, Paquetá does a really good job of positioning himself between Van de Ven and Romero, and forcing the ball to go from Vicario to Van de Ven. And when Van de Ven wants to go back and across to Romero, you get back to Vicario, and then Paquetá's just standing there basically in front of Romero, making it hard to pass to him. So the ball just kept coming down the left-hand side. And that worked really well for a bit, but because we don't jump with intensity behind that, it kind of got into situations where it just played to Palhinha and Palhinha just played it across to Romero, and then Romero has the ball. Or alternatively, as the half went on, more situations where Palhinha dropped into a back three and made it easy for them to go across one by one across the back line to find Romero as well. So they were able to sort of get around it. Secondarily, I would say that Spurs, made changes to their lineup that impacted their ability to be successful on the left-hand side of the pitch. I was really surprised when the lineup came out and Matistel was playing through the middle and Xavi Simons was playing on the left. But when you think about the specific issues that they faced in the Bournemouth match, and the fact that they might have been anticipating that we would try and copy that because it went so well for Bournemouth, bringing Xavi Simons into the side on the left, as compared to Brennan Johnson, who kept giving the ball away under pressure on the left, actually gave the side a lot more balance for Spurs. So even though they didn't have the same progressive quality deep on the left side of the pitch, when they were able to find their advanced players on the left side of the pitch, this time, there's Bergvall there and there's Simons there, as compared to, I believe it would have been Palhinha on that side, but the other midfielder was Bentancur and Brennan Johnson. So very different in terms of the quality that they have to actually receive and do something useful under pressure with the ball. So hard for us to execute for that reason, but also hard for us to execute because, like I said, we were a lot more passive in the way that we did it than Bournemouth did it. As such, they were able to get a lot of passes into Kudus and Simons. And frankly, for Thomas Frank, a simple game plan where you access those guys as much as possible does just work when they're as good as they are.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of, this is Frank ball, right? Like it's a nice adaptation on what he was doing at Brentford. I think it is slightly more positive's harsh because that makes it sound like Brentford are negative, but I think that's just a benefit of the players that he's got available. Like you've got Romero now, so you can be more progressive. But it is kind of keep it tight at the back. Like foremost important thing for him is make it very, very, very difficult for the opposition in every game to break you down and get through you. And at Brentford, he had the quality of Schade, Bomo, Wissa, Damsgaard to rely on, and knows that if he does his job as a coach to create a really tight, watertight, out of possession plan, that he has the quality ahead of them when they get the ball to eventually, through sort of an almost attritional approach in certain games or a more direct approach in others, a chance will come, whether that's a set piece, a corner, a long throw, whether that's a transitional moment with Bomo carrying the ball and squaring it to Wissa, or Bomo carrying the ball and getting a shot off himself. Now you switch out Bomo, Wissa, Damsgaard with Kudus, Simons, Champions League level players. Not that actually, to be honest, Wissa and Bomo aren't. I think they are, but just the whole cast of characters that he's got at his disposal. Certainly not disposable. They are very much important. It makes sense that game plan probably just becomes even more effective because you have players that on the drop of a hat can make something happen. I thought Simons actually was. I didn't think and he would be as impactful based on how little time he's had around so far, and I think to see him come in and instantly just look at home in this side and look like he's ready to take on that burden of being like sort of a fulcrum of the attack, quite scary for the league really when they've got Kudus on the other side who can do everything that we know he can do and did in this game. Actually, I think they clearly looked to get to Kudus as frequently as possible and let him just dribble, and I think Diouf actually, if we're going to try and take a positive out of it, did a pretty good job considering that it wasn't a good game for the team and that Kudus is one of the trickier matchups in the whole league in terms of a player that can run at you directly and is strong and is quick and is capable of actually dribbling you, not just knocking it beyond you and running past. And I thought Diouf, did a pretty stand-up job given he's only played 4, 5, however many Premier League matches. But ultimately, if you're going to set up to kind of just come against wave after wave of direct attacks from Spurs, when they've got that quality, it's you have to be a seriously good out of possession outfit to be able to withstand that, and then be a really good counter-attacking outfit to actually take those moments. And if there's two things that we've not at the minute, it's very, very good out of possession. I think we're fine out of possession, as we said. Like, I think the 4-2-3-1 has worked, but it's not strong enough to withstand. Like, it's not strong enough to depend on, I would say, at the minute.
It's the set pieces in this game.
Yeah.
It's the set pieces in this game. I mean, it brings us back to what we were speaking about before. Like, from open play, they create virtually nothing until like really after the 80th minute is when they start creating from open play, which is completely understandable. That's like you've been down to 10 men for a while. They've freshened things up. By the way, at that point, they bring 5 players on who are fresh. We've got quite a tired team then, who have been trying to cover the gaps and make it difficult for them to score. Kudus comes into the centre. I think he starts to exploit space really nicely in the centre, and they get a couple of big chances off the back of that. Bergvall was very good in the second half against 10 men. I thought he was really, really nice runs, really good quality on the ball every time he got it. I thought he made a really big difference for them in that context. But before then, there's not really much from open play, and I think it's one of those things where, like, you know, I imagine people will be critical of Spurs and how limited it was up until that point. But I think when you know West Ham's weaknesses, this is what we were trying to say earlier. I think there's no reason not to have a very simple kind of knock it into the box game plan, win set pieces game plan, because the vulnerability of our team is such in those areas is such that you probably will just eventually score doing that. The question for Spurs going forward is against teams that are more secure or aren't as bad as we are. Are you able to consistently get enough upside out of Kudus and Simons in those moments to be able to score, or do you need to structure your the way you're approaching attacks in a different way to be able to generate upside more consistently and more from open play ultimately, because you're arguably not going to get away with creating so little from open play against other teams. And that's where it's like, how much of it is Spurs specifically playing even more like that because they're playing against us and because we have those vulnerabilities, and how much of that is a vulnerability or a weakness that Spurs may have in other games going forward. And that's going to be interesting to track from a Spurs perspective. From our perspective, I don't think there's really much to take away beyond that. Out of possession, in possession, I think it's crude to put it down to this, and not quite correct, but I think if you were to try and summarize, this game felt to me a lot like Lucas Paquetá not at his best, and a classic example of, this is really annoying, we kind of need Lucas everywhere. And when Lucas isn't everywhere, he's not, our 8, our 10, and our striker all at the same time, it's really difficult for us to consistently function well as an in-possession unit. We really lacked quality, I thought, on the second line to progress. I thought Souček gave us niche at all with the ball. And the previous rotations that we've seen were disallowed. So like in the last match, we saw Paquetá a lot drop out and Souček go forward, so that we had Paquetá on the second line a lot of the time when we're trying to build up. So that's in deep midfield. We lose that in this game because Paquetá's high. We lose the ability to kind of like have that drop in. So Souček is doing more work for us in build-up. That limits us more in build-up. It makes us easier to press. It forces us to go long more. That's worse when you have Lucas up front as well. So like these things kind of compound each other. Even though Lucas makes sense up front, if you had the conditions that he creates when he's deeper, to receive the passes that he's playing, when you take him out, there's no one playing those passes. So the whole thing sort of begins to sort of fall apart, I would suggest, which is a real frustration, to be honest. I think James Ward-Prowse does an okay job of trying to create upside for us progressively in the game. And again, probably creates the best moments in attack. Him and Diouf, Ward-Prowse has a couple of good moments in open play, but he also whips in one very, very good set piece that we probably should have scored from. And you can't just sort of shrug that off as if it's not valuable. I've seen a lot of commentary in West Ham spaces that, like, what's the point in playing Ward-Prowse? Can't understand why he's still in the team. Defensively, I mean, he's offering virtually zero disruption, and him and Souček combined have made fewer tackles, I think, than some players have in the team individually that play in more advanced positions, which is, obviously a massive concern. But from an in-possession point of view, he's kind of a requirement at the moment, given the lack of quality around in that area to help us progress. And I think we've missed also Todibo and Agurd, who's, the first 2 games, things are bad from an out-of-possession point of view. But those 2 players are helping us access the front line so much more regularly from an in-possession point of view. So it's all these kind of catch-22s of like, we need Paquetá further forward in this game because we haven't had quality at 9, but now we miss him in midfield. We need to take Todibo out of the team because we're not defending well enough and he's not helping us organise or win aerials in there. But now we can't find the number 9 and make Lucas good when he's playing there. So there's all these issues coming together that make it very, very difficult. Finding that balance between attack and defence, and therefore the best system, the best shape and the best 11 is really vital. And I don't think you can continue to be in a position where we're tinkering and not really finding it. It's been a very long time now, and it still feels like we're not quite there. A lot of pressure, I would suggest, on Sunguti Magassar and Mateusz Fernandes to come in and fix a lot of the problems that we're facing. Let's take one more break and come back and ask some of the big questions. We're back. Patreon.com/Analytics United. 7-day free trial. This is going to be a squeeze, and we're going to have a whole extra episode of Darcy and I talking about a lot of this stuff. So if you really want to go deep on some of these big questions, look at the data that's powering the discussions that we're having. We often try and keep the actual talking about numbers in the main pod to a minimum, but we are generally always using data to inform what we're bringing to the main pod. There's a reason why we're called Analytics United, and we're going to actually look in more depth at the numbers, at the charts, at the graphs, with that on screen in ET this week. So if you want to go and look at some of that stuff, how we've progressed or regressed or otherwise, from Moyes through Lopetegui through Potter, then join us over there for that chat. We're going to start it now, though. I think that question that I sort of landed on there, which is it just pressure on Sunguti Magassar and Mateusz Fernandes to fix everything, or are we actually developing as a team towards a clear style, a clear new idea, whatever the idea was going to be when we got rid of Moyes originally, to try and be a different kind of team, is a really important question to begin to at least answer at this point, because results are just not good enough at the moment.
Yeah, I think you're bang on the money. I think maybe we whipped ourselves into a false sense of hope with the Forest game to some extent, but I think also that comes with that's probably some element of sadness after the Spurs game, I guess, for want of a better word. But I do think, in terms of, was it a turning point? I think if I zoom out a bit and think about the 4-2-3-1 and think about where we were when we were playing a back three and what's been different since we've moved to a 4-2-3-1. I think one of the big concerns that I had was that we were playing with 3 centre-backs and our box defending was terrible. A move to a 4-2-3-1, whilst it hasn't necessarily come with huge strides forward, and if anything, maybe it's made us look slightly more... it's felt somewhat regressive, maybe, because it has felt like a reversion back to things that we used to do, that we promised we weren't going to do, and we were going to strive to be more aggressive out of possession. And actually, we've dropped into a 4-2-3-1 mid-block that has had passivity baked into it somewhat because of the profiles of midfielders that we've been trying to do it with. But I think our box defending has improved. I think in 2 games, we've limited good opposition to very little in open play. I think Forest did not a lot against us, and we won 3-0. I think Spurs did also not a lot against us in possession, and realistically 3-0 is not a fair result, I would say. Obviously, it's a fair result in terms of us being crap at set-piece defending, but if we actually were able to focus on that and fix that, which is something that I absolutely would be trying to do immediately and probably would have done weeks ago, then you probably come away from that losing the game 1-0. And it's still upsetting, disappointing, but you kind of just put it down to, okay, at this moment in time, Spurs are the better team. But I think the 4-2-3-1, to me, is a step in the right direction, even though it feels gut-wrenchingly disappointing that this is the result that we've come away with. And I also think, and this is maybe with my wishful thinking cap on, and I know that you and Darcy are going to come in with some fairly damning data, so definitely do go and check that out on Extra Time. But I do think a lot has been made of the idea that Magassar and Fernandes will come in and fix this, or at least need to come in and take us towards something better than this. And I don't know. It's a lot, but I can see how if you manage to find the right balance. And I think Somerville looking lively kind of helps this, because I think there's now a case to say, well, Paquetá definitely plays in the midfield as part of the three, because with left wing we can leave with Somerville. We don't need to put him out there. So then you've got two places to fill. You've just spent a lot of money on profiles of midfielder that should, in theory, address the lack of combativeness in midfield, as you've alluded to. Ward-Prowse and Souček ranking right down there as some of the least combative midfielders in the league this season. We know that the whole Potter system is kind of based on having dual monsters in midfield and being able to compete. And until we can do that, I don't think the system will ever really function particularly well. So I hope that maybe with Souček being red carded, that sort of fast tracks that a bit, because you're much more likely to see Magassar come in. Fernandes is obviously going to start regardless, because we spent all that money. And a midfield of Magassar, Paquetá and Fernandes maybe is better, because you've got three players there that are combative by nature. Magassar probably helps with some of that progressive stuff as well that we've talked about lacking in Ward-Prowse and Souček, who Ward-Prowse is safe, Souček's not as safe, and neither of them are particularly progressive. In those three midfielders, you probably alleviate some of that as well. So maybe this is copium, as the kids say, and maybe this is me trying to see a brighter future. But I do think, based on what all of those players offer and what all of the issues currently are, when you combine that with the fact that the 4-2-3-1, whilst we have just come off the back of a drubbing, I think has improved us and should be the system that we look at moving forward. There is a glimmer of hope, I would say, but there are also still huge concerns that aren't being addressed, which is impossible to overlook.
I think the question for me is, is maybe a bigger one, which is, and slightly harder to answer. First of all, before I talk about that, actually, I'll address what you said about, last week and false hope and this stuff after Forest. I think all that the Spurs game is it's the flip side of the stuff we discussed against Forest, right? Like, we finished the pod after the Forest game talking about, is it good? Well, really, we were saying it is good to have a manager that is capable or willing to change things if they're not working, in comparison to, like Russell Martin, Southampton, or Amorim at Man United, like these managers who've just like stuck to a set of ideas, even if it isn't really working very well. And I think that remains true, right? I don't disagree with what I said at that point, because we got a different result against Spurs. I still think that's true. I think it's really good to have a manager that is adaptable, willing to change things if they're not working. But it leads to a bigger question when you continuously change things because they're not working, which has been the case, I think, for most of his time at West Ham. We've played 4-2-3-1. That was the first system he played in his first game. Then we played a 3-box-3, a 3-4-3 for a period. We went back to 4-2-3-1. Then we went to a 5-3-2 or a 3-5-2 for a while. Then we changed that to a slightly different variation of that after going to a 4-2-3-1 for another game. We came back and played sort of like a 3-4-1-2, where Souček was joining the front two. We finished the season playing back on the 5-3-2. We came into this season playing a 5-3-2. We then changed that to a 4-2-3-1. So, yeah, it's good to be able to recognize, okay, this isn't working right now. We're going to have to change the system. We might have to change a few players in order to get a better result. But that's not then sticking as something that we do and execute well and continue to get good outcomes. So you then arrive at this question, which is like, where are we going? I'm glad we can change when things are not going well and find a way to get a result. But then what happens when the next result is not good? And do we stick to what we were just doing and focus on trying to be better at doing that? Or do we change again to something else, or to something that we've done previously, and go back to trying to develop at what we were doing in that case? And I'm not saying that the principles shift dramatically, that, across, okay, we're playing a 4-2-3-1 this week, which means that we're going to play like a Pep Guardiola team, and we're playing a 5-3-2 this week. That means we're going to play like an Antonio Conte team. That's not how it works, right? There are a set of ideas that we're trying to implement regardless of the shape that we play with. But it does change, like, the relationships on the pitch. It does change who you're interacting with. It does change your role on the pitch. Like, you are shifting around and having to wear different hats and do different jobs week to week in different shapes and different systems for the team. And although the team ideas might be similar, like, the way that feels as a player on the pitch when you're playing as a left back or as a wing back, or as a right back that becomes part of a back three, or as a wing back that's maintaining the width at the top of the pitch, or as a midfielder that's at one of the points of the box, or as a midfielder that's like dictating from deep, or like it changes the emphasis of what you're doing. And I want our players to be adaptable, to be able to react well in those situations and be able to do well in different conditions. Everyone wants that. Everyone wants their players to be completely adaptable and to be able to change the shape and the ideas each week and bake in rotations and have that flexibility and then be really unpredictable and really difficult to play against. When you haven't got that base level of consistency and execution, when the level of execution shifts dramatically, you have the same set of ideas, you win 1 week 3-0 in a game that could easily have been 0-0, and you lose 3-0 the next week in a game that frankly could have easily been 0-0 as well. Forest, we win ultimately because they start to push to try and win. They open up a lot of space on the right side of the pitch from their perspective, the left side of the pitch from our perspective. We exploit that 3 times in a row and we score 3 goals from it. And it gets worse for them because once the first one goes in, they have to continue to commit, they have to continue to throw more bodies forwards, and the things that were helping us become easier and help us even more, and we could start to pile on goals. Spurs is kind of a similar case. They score a set piece, we get a red card, and now it's easier, and we can kind of like create a sort of almost tailspin effect off that from what a game that really feels more like a 0-0 or a 1-0 loss becomes a 3-0 defeat. I think in many ways that encapsulates the fact that there isn't a consistency in execution underlying any of this. There isn't a consistency of ability to execute the ideas week to week and get similar outcomes. The variance is really big, actually. And, one of the things that Potter fixed when he first came in is we went from Lopetegui with like wild variance in outcomes. You have a game against Leicester where you like pop off, I don't know how many shots it was, like 30, but because you got Mavropanos on the halfway line with Vardy, you're conceding goals on the break. And, like 1 week you might execute well enough to be able to secure lots of shots, and another week you might get completely peppered yourself because you're really open, you're pressing really high, the players aren't very good at doing it. Potter comes in, boom, variance comes right down. We execute quite stably, quite consistently. There isn't a big swing in results. It's kind of like 1-goal games most of the time. What's happened since then is not like, okay, there's the ground and now we build layers and we get better and better and we slowly develop an idea and we learn how to execute more consistently and we turn those single goal margin defeats to draws and then into wins. Actually, the variance has just increased since then. And now, you're swinging from a 3-0 win, from a 5-1 defeat to a 3-0 loss, and the shape is changing and some of the ideas, they might be small, some of the ideas are changing in there as well. So, if you change everything to develop as a team, to transition as a team, to become a different kind of team, because this was ultimately the motivation for change. Like, the case for change for me, if it was ever based on the results, was stupid. Like, the case for change could only have been on the basis of being a different sort of team, being a team that maybe could achieve even more and sustainably control games even more and win games more regularly and more consistently because we wanted to have more control. Like, that had to be what, of course it might have been about getting better results, as an outcome from that. But the diagnosis of the issue was not, we don't win enough games. The diagnosis of the issue was like, this style is not enabling us to win as many games as we think we might be able to. Like, that has to have been the process. So if we're trying to develop as a team into a team that does that, what development is happening? Where is that? What are we doing? Are we doing that? Are we in a process where we're developing to do that? In preseason, I guess I kind of felt like we were, because we laid out a clear foundation of a set of ideas. I could see how they could work if we executed them consistently. Like, in most of the games in preseason, we get a lot of situations where the midfield is in a diamond. It functions really well, and we open space, and Todibo plays a diagonal ball to Füllkrug along the ground. Füllkrug loses the ball when, in fact, if he just played it to his left and his first touch had been secure, then we would have had a midfielder free and away with Juve to hit and then players bombing the box. And actually in one of the games, I can't remember which one it was, they blurred, it's Bournemouth, isn't it? In one of the games, we scored 2 that work exactly like that. We freed Juve away on the left-hand side, having done a move like that. He swings the ball in, Bowen scores at the back post, and you're like, okay, I can see the blueprint of the ideas that we want to bring into the season. And if we can develop as a team, if we can do these better week on week, we will be fine, and we'll eventually be a team that can dominate a bit more of the ball and can consistently score goals doing that and control games doing that. 2 weeks into the season, we dispense with that completely, and the variance swings off the back of that really wildly game to game. And it does lead me, at least, to question, okay, yes, the flip side is exactly the flip side of what we talked about last week. Okay, yes, it's good that we can change because we can identify things that aren't working, even if we had good ideas. They didn't translate. Well, what are the new ideas? And what direction is that taking us in? And have we actually recruited to do that? Or did we recruit to do something else? You know, what trust the process is often something that's bandied around, but like, what is the process here?
Yeah, I hear you. I think, and I did kind of think throughout pre-season as well. I think probably go back and listen to one of the pods, and I probably raised the fact that I still sort of felt Potter was waiting to move to a 4 anyway, and I think allowing a Gerd to go, I don't think we recruited enough centre-back depth basically to suggest that the 3 at the back system was plan A, in my opinion, because I think we're an injury away from basically having not enough centre-backs to play a 3 at the back system, because you'd have no one on the bench, essentially. And
Can I ask a very quick question about that then? Just as you've said it, like, if that was the case, why didn't we just play 4-2-3-1 with the players that we had in pre-season?
Yeah, no, it's a very
so we
good
could have
question.
developed with that idea.
Yeah, I think I think you're right to raise that. I think and this was my big issue with the window, is that we left the most important signings, in my opinion, in Fernandes and Magassar to right at the end of the window after pre-season, when it was clear that that was what needed to be addressed. And I think the whole of the back end of last season was constant discussions about, well, we have to play this specific way because we don't have the midfielders to be able to play a 2 in midfield, so therefore we need to have a 3 in midfield, and then we need to have a 3 at the back if we're going to play 2 in midfield, because we need that extra coverage at the back when the midfield gets breached. And I think, in part, to me, it felt like pre-season was a continuation of that, because we still didn't have the midfield profiles. And then I wonder, and this isn't completely hypothesizing, but whether there was an element of uncertainty as to whether we'd even get those midfield profiles, and therefore was it even worth trying to do the 4-2-3-1? Because if we don't get those midfield profiles, then it will have been the reverse, right? We'll have tried to do a 4-2-3-1 throughout pre-season, and then, we didn't get the midfield profiles. Shit, we're going to have to go back to playing 3 in midfield because we don't have the ability to play a double pivot. That is complete hypothetical, and that's just me making assumptions based on my knowledge of Potter before and my knowledge of, but I think both of what we thought last season, which was actually it was a marriage of convenience in terms of the tactics we were playing rather than Potter wanting to do his own thing. And the issue is that I think and maybe this is where my hope comes from, is that I still don't think we've actually seen what I think Potter's preferred starting 11 would be. But that is a huge issue in itself. And that's beyond Potter, I think. But also partly, as you say, could we not have just tried it in pre-season anyway? Is there much value in teaching Diouf and Walker-Peters and Wan-Bissaka to play as wing-backs if you're just going to ask them to be full-backs a week later? Probably not. It probably sets us back. But I think that speaks to the much wider issue that everyone's talking about in the fan base at the minute, right? Is that, where does culpability lie? Who takes what percentage of culpability? How much is the players? How much is the coaching staff? How much is the managers? How much is it the board sort of hamstringing the coaching staff by not bringing in the right profiles of player from day dot when it was absolutely abundantly clear what we needed? That's a whole podcast in itself. And people have their own opinions about that. I know that we do. And I'm sure that you and Darcy will come onto this in much more detail in extra time, because it will pinpoint exactly where those issues are.
Yeah, one final question then that I have to ask you, and it leads into a show that we're going to be doing on Patreon this week, which is the preview podcast, and we do PMP as well to build into that. We've got Crystal Palace next. You're speaking about, Potter's inability to try plan A with a lineup that he would prefer, theorizing that 4-2-3-1 might have been a preference in any case, and we've delayed on getting the profiles in to be able to do that. If Souček is now suspended and Magassar is available to come in, Fernandes is fit, Somerville is fit, pretty much everyone is available bar Souček going into next week. Guilherme's even back on the pitch in the final 30 minutes of the Spurs game. What does plan A look like?
Well, this is difficult.
What are we going to do?
Because I think, frustratingly, we've got Palace, which I think of all the oppositions in the Prem does actually pose the question of, do you match up? Because their shape is so effective. And then you're back in this cycle and spiral of, we're going to go back to 3 centre-backs and a midfield pairing to match up, which is no good for the squad because the confusion lives on, because there has to do something different again. But if we decide to go with the 4-2-3-1 again, then in my mind, the optimal system would be something, either a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1, something that probably oscillates between the two. That if it's a 4-3-3, you could have the option of Magasar in the 6, who could in theory drop but then we're back to Lopetegui days. But you could drop into a 3 with him in the middle, and you can free up both wing backs, or you can oscillate into a 4-2-3-1 from a 4-3-3 where one of the 8 drops in to create a double pivot with Magasar, one pushes up. Somerville probably comes in to tuck in to create the box. Bowen holds the width rather than comes in the middle, because I think one issue that we saw in this game, which we haven't really discussed, is when Bowen comes inside, he's losing the ball so much, and that really limits how much you can do in possession, because if you're trying to create a tidy box midfield where you're keeping things ticking over, waiting for the width to arrive, if you're losing the ball on reception, you're never going to be able to do that. So I think creating a system that moves Bowen out of the box and actually makes him a width holder rather than one of the wing backs, and maybe you bring... Well, I think Walker Peters can do it and has been one of the better players, so he can just play a slightly more reserved fullback role to create that 3. You have Diouf creating the width and Somerville tucking in. That would probably be it for me. Paquetá creates part of the midfield again with Magasar and Fernandes, probably Magasar deepest. Then it's Füllkrug or Wilson up top, which Füllkrug's fitness, who knows? Wilson, not the ideal fit profile-wise, and therein lies the issues again, right? Like, I think the fact that we're even having to question whether Paquetá should start up front is an issue in itself, because really he should be the first name on the team sheet in midfield for me. But it's not as obvious as that at the minute, because there's debates as to whether he's our best hold up forward as well.
So I think if you want more previewing Palace, we're going to cover that on Patreon in more depth in terms of the question specifically of whether to match up against them or whether to go with theorized plan A because players are fit and available to play next week. I think one of the big questions that to land on and to leave with today and to think about going into next week is how a team that wants to possess more of the ball and is going to, because we see this consistently across Potter's time at West Ham, going to have more possession in the defensive third, has to defend in order to be able to create enough and control enough to be able to win enough.
Yep.
And if there are in possession developments that are required, and we've talked about in depth, I think, on this podcast with new players coming in, then there are out of possession leaps required.
Quite literally. Probably
ginormous leaps required to enable the kind of control, frankly, that is just required to be able to have enough confidence in being able to get the right outcomes and not just like concede a set piece and lose as a result of having conceded a set piece. Big things to think about going into next week. Join us on Patreon for extra time looking at the data that powers all of the chat that we've just had, and specifically looking at actually some of the issues in the data and going into more depth on those. We'll talk about individual performances as well. So Cal just mentioned Bowen in inside positions. How does he perform in this game? But then also, what does that mean for Bowen going forward when the option is either come inside the pitch and receive back to goal and don't give the ball away as you do in this game, or play wide, hold the width, maybe don't get into as many positions to shoot and score goals. I think that's just something that we'll talk about there. So join us for that. And we will see you next week after the Palace game. Come on your irons.